Is the sentencing of racist Vicki Momberg, the former estate agent, tonight sentenced to an effective 2 years in prison with 1 year suspended.
Yeah, we'll keep trying to speak to a legal expert. Earlier, Bongani spoke to Human Rights Commission Communications Co-ordinator Gushwell to reflect on today's landmark judgment.
The South African Human Rights Commission has noted this particular judgment, and apart from that, it's also important to note the fact that we have also intervened previously in the Equality Court, and that would add some context. In that we took Ms. Momberg to the Equality Court in this instance on behalf of the police officers that were obviously, that had these racial slurs cast against them. And even in that particular proceeding, it didn't seem that Ms. Momberg was particularly remorseful for what she had done or for what she had said. Apart from that, the Commission is actually right now in the process of taking her to court on the basis of contempt of court because she hasn't fulfilled her duties as set out by the Equality Court. So in that, from that particular perspective, yes, of course, this is an appropriate sentence. We note it, and we're confident that the court has made the correct decision in this particular instance.
The magistrate was quite clear. Racial slurs of this type can no longer be accommodated or tolerated.
Indeed, and the Equality Court found exactly the same before that. So that reaffirms that particular position. Of course, what we need to take cognizance of is that these charges here, this was a criminal process, and the crime that was committed in this particular instance was criminal injury, and the court would have been guided by those principles, those legal principles.
I mean, can we eradicate racism? And what about those who say this is just thought policing?
Well, we need to also understand that we live within a constitutional democracy, and our constitution actually outlines that there are three paramount provisions that our entire Bill of Rights is based on, and that is the issue of dignity, equality, as well as freedom. And that we can't be in a situation whereby people flagrantly disregard those particular rights or those principles that our rights are based on. And one of the key things is that we need to understand that hate speech is not tolerated within our constitution as well as within legislation. So on that basis, we can't call it thought policing when it is fundamentally unconstitutional to be racist and to make racist utterances of this particular nature. And the solution is not necessarily trying to police away the issue of racism. There is space for dialogue and for people to try to reconcile the differences that we have within society.
What about the criticism that whether it's yourselves or the Equality Court, that so far we've seen these incidents quite often on social media, but perhaps you've treaded a little too softly, that it's taken the court in this instance to deal with it as decisively as they have today?
Again, the context must be understood that this was a criminal charge of criminal injury that was brought. Obviously, the use of the K word is fundamental to the particular charge, but it's not as if hate speech, that this is, that she's serving this particular sentence because of hate speech. She's serving it because she committed the crime of criminal injury. So it was a criminal matter. The Equality Court has been very firm in its findings, and what the Equality Court has done, even including Ms. Momberg, is to issue heavy fines. If I'm not mistaken, her fine was in the region of 100,000 rands, which is not something that's very convenient. But apart from that, we can't just have a punitive approach. As I mentioned earlier on, in the Commission holds this view as well, we can't try to punish away racism only. We need to understand that within South Africa we have a very divided past, and that we need to deal with it in some way or the other. And one of the things that the Equality Court does quite regularly is to look at the issue of trying to rehabilitate the individual.
So where does this place the use of the K word? Because now part of the debate is who else can be punished in this way for a similar offence. I know there's a case before the courts where two black people are taking each other to court for the use of that word. And what about other pejoratives to other community or population groups and communities like the LGBTI community, for example, or even indeed women?
I think that the guiding principle that we should use here is the Equality Act. In this particular instance, and the Equality Act actually gives us provisions and guidelines for the basis on which you can't commit acts of hate speech or forms of discrimination. That's the first thing to outline. So yes, it's not just limited to the use of the K word. I think that we can look at it contextually. How was the word used? I mean, as you know, that all too often we find that people are likened to animals, for example. What does that impact have on the particular society and on a particular community? And what is the context that the word was used within? So I think it sets a clear precedent that hate speech and words similar to this or akin to this can no longer be tolerated within society.
Will it work, or will people simply retreat into their little racist enclaves?
Well, I think that in this particular instance, the key issue that stands out is that the criminal justice system always wants to serve as a deterrent when sentencing people. So the whole idea behind it is that every time we hear that someone has been found guilty of a particular crime, and this is the custodial sentence that they've received, that the rest of society looks upon that and says, I don't want to conduct myself in that particular fashion, and thereby avoid a custodial sentence. And that is really the hope, that this is going to be a deterrent, and it will deter people from conducting themselves in this particular way.
Clearly, as you say, a precedent has been set. How does this empower the Human Rights Commission, for example, going forward?
It empowers the whole of society, because the important point to point out is that people can approach, for example, the equality courts directly. The Commission has been very active in that particular space, and it also helps us in our findings, our directives, as well as our recommendations going forward. But apart from that also, it enables people to understand that there is this crime called criminal injuria. And very often you'll find that it's in the purview of those that are legally minded and, legally educated, and something that we don't often hear about. And now, believe me, similar to dolus eventualis in the Oscar Pistorius case, we're going to hear more about criminal injuria and people using that as a mechanism to say, but my rights have been infringed here.
Well, that was my conversation with the Human Rights Commission's Gushwell Brooks there. We do